So I was gonna make Ken sing a song, but then
Only because I was
pretty
singing it
sure,
before we started recording.
yes, and it was in relation to today's episode, guys. But I'm pretty sure we get copyrighted. So
I was gonna say no one wants to hear me sing, so that's what I was gonna say.
eh,
Anyways,
definitely
today's
not as
first
good as the
time
original.
diagnosis, first time treating a patient, first time everything.
A little bit, yeah.
Let's just go ahead and jump right in.
That's a first.
You're listening to the PT Assistants Podcast with your hosts, Ken
and Laura. Thanks for joining for another exciting episode.
All right. So the first time.
You ready?
There's always a first time, right?
Are we still talking about therapy? I just want to make sure before we continue. Otherwise, we're going to have to put some disclaimers in the beginning of the episode.
You know what's funny is I literally set it up and I was like, this could go so many ways. But yes, in regards to physical therapy, there's always a first.
So this came up because we run mainly on a skeleton crew for our work. There's only 3 therapists. Mm-hmm. And the other day, one of our therapists weren't able to come in. So by we, I mean me, I had to treat some of his patients. The thing about that, though, is that he sees certain patients because of either the complexity or just because he's treated them before and I really haven't, so I've never really had to do it. Until this day, where we were pinched between a new eval, which the other PT had to see, and then the follow-up for this patient I'm speaking of. And I kind of just had to look at all my resources, but there wasn't much because the patient I was treating had Bell's palsy. Hey. If you're unfamiliar with Bell's palsy, we have an episode on Bell's palsy that we came out with a very long time ago.
It is.
On whether or not it's even effective for physical therapy and whatnot. But I've never treated anybody with Bell's palsy. Research and my notes and everything else, there's not really a lot on Bell's palsy. So I went into our EMR. I looked up Bell's palsy, the exercises that came up. So a lot of it is just exercises, some facilitation, tapping, quick stretching, massage around the facial.
A lot of neuro.
True. But the outcomes, whether or not you do therapy, there's no difference.
Supposedly.
Here's what I found.
What did it find? I'm just kidding.
I don't know, but Siri found something.
But so that kind of gave us the thought of this episode of kind of treating a diagnosis for the first time when you've never dealt with it, on top of the PT that normally sees this patient wasn't there. So it wasn't like, hey, what have you been doing? Especially since I've never seen this patient, I've never treated this patient, I've never worked with this diagnosis. I couldn't ask him because he wasn't there.
Yeah.
So I had to wing it. Needless to say, I feel like the visit went fairly well, I feel like. But it was funny because during the treatment, he was like, oh yeah, you're very different than the other guy. And I was like, I mean, that makes sense. I don't think I'm doing anything that he does because I have no idea what he does. So
you're like, yeah, each person has a different way of doing things. That's always my go-to answer if someone says that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, you get a little bit of everybody. Like everyone has their own techniques and styles, so it's good to get a little variety in there. Is usually my route. But do you have any advice as far as someone treating a diagnosis for the first time?
Well, I think you see it a lot, of course, when you first go into your clinical rotations. Like almost every single diagnosed patient you see is
I was actually going to say that too. I feel like it's definitely more new grad related.
Well, but the thing is I was thinking about this topic because I was like, oh, I might just resort back to new grad all the time, and thinking about that, and clinical rotations, thinking about that, and I look at it and I look at myself now versus back then when I would receive. When I received something that was new diagnosis or something that was slightly out of the box than normal, it would throw me for a whole loop and I'd almost panic because I'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't know, that we'd never really covered this specifically. What am I going to do? And nowadays, I get something new, I'm like, all right, let me kind of Google it. And then I kind of I go a lot based off of either the exercises. If there's no exercises, I Google it, I read a little bit about it. but overall, you can kind of find some of the same things. Again, there's some weird ones like Bell's palsy or, you know, TMJ, which again, if you talk to Ken, we all have a TMJ,
I'm
but
glad you brought
disorder.
it up.
But like those are a
It,
little bit like you can't just go to your normal muscular like major exercises. That usually will cover a long list. But
and
I
you
don't know.
mentioned Google. So I did a
Yeah.
little bit of Googling, YouTubing of Bell's palsy, and just kind of seeing like what other people have done and what treatments. What do you feel like is a valid resource tool? Because I feel like no, like we have our training, we have our background, so we can see something and be like, okay, I don't really get why that works, so I'm not doing that. Or I can see why that works. Okay, I like that. I'm gonna do that. But do you just like find whatever you find, or do you have like your go tos? Do you go to like the APTA? Let me find a research article on what they're doing. Do you
Not
have like a go to?
particularly for me. My go-to is usually like a credible source that tells you about the diagnosis. Whether it's not like, for example, like the Mayo Clinic or you know, John Hopkins, like things like that that are credible sources telling a little bit more about the actual diagnosis and what the disease is. Because like some of it's not so much like they could come in and they could have weakness and you're working lower extremities or something like that. But like I kind of look at those just to see if there's anything I need to be quickly aware of like, okay, this, you know, heat is really bad for them, or you know, cold's really bad. And this is where having a really good PT is very helpful too, because things like that will be in the eval and they should put things like that in the eval for us. But, you know, it's again, looking it up, having a general idea is good too, just so if the patient starts to talk to you about it. But I think mainly what it comes down to, like, of what's a good, like, a routine to go with, or what exercises or um, skilled sources that we give a manual or anything like that. Like, I think using your clinical judgment, looking at the different resources is really what is going to set you apart on whether or not you should do something or not. You know, we have the bases. That's the big thing. Like, you think about school in general, you don't go through an exercise class of like, hey, this is what you should do for this exactly. This is what you should do for this. Um, this exercise is improved for this. No, you don't go over it. You talk about like why certain things help, what we're looking for certain things, the movements of the muscles, what you're working on. You get those bases, so like that way you can take this exercise and be like, yeah, it's normally treated for this, but hey, I'm gonna do it for this too. Um, for example, just a random one out there, like one of the ones I like to do is I like to do single leg balance with ball toss, not for just lower extremities. I like to do it for upper extremities too. Kind
I
of
mean, I'll
brings
do it
in
a
a
lot
lot
for
of,
like core and stuff too.
yeah, core. Yeah, exactly. And so it's like one of those, like, that's our clinical judgment of taking something, looking at it, and adjusting it to what works for them and what they need. So I think that's where, like, I don't really necessarily have a source or anything I go to. I just use my judgment on
One of the things
what
you
I read.
mentioned was your PT and like their notes and whatnot. And typically that's always my go to, right? Like they did
Mm-hmm.
the eval, they know what the
Always
plan is, they
first.
know what they want. But I guess what I found difficult in this scenario was that the PT that did the eval wasn't there. And the
Mm-hmm.
other PT has also never seen this patient. So there's a lot of talks of before this day happened. We're like, oh hey, we have a Bell's palsy patient. Like, Ken, do you want a little refresher on some like neuro stuff? Like, do you want to practice on what we do? And I was like, yeah, I'm down. Like, if I'm going to see this patient, I'd like to somewhat keep it consistent to what he's been doing and kind
Mm-hmm.
of where he's at. Unfortunately, that did not happen before I saw the patient. It happened definitely after. As soon as he came back, I was like, hey, can we go through what you do for Bell's palsy? Because off the bat, he was immediately like, oh, you're different than the other guy. You're not doing the same techniques, which there was nothing wrong with that. Like, me and the patient hit it off pretty well. We Um, but I guess just like one thing is just consistency. A lot of patients do like consistency. So knowing what they've been doing up to that point can be beneficial, but sometimes, hey, keeping them on their toes and doing something completely different. Some patients appreciate that as well because you might try something or do something that the other therapist hasn't, and they might find that very beneficial.
Yeah,
Is there
I agree.
anybody like do you remember the last new diagnosis you had?
Well, so it's not technically like new. I've never really treated it, if this makes sense. Um, like it had been around, but concussions. We do a lot of vestibular, surprising. I don't know. I was just never thought our clinic would, but our clinic does do a lot of vestibular. And you talk about concussions, and we've had a concussion once before, I think in my previous, and so literally out of 4 years of working at the same place, we had one concussion patient come in, and we weren't even doing anything technically for the concussion. He was lower body that we were working on, but like we just had to be aware of the concussion stuff, like any symptoms rising or anything like that. But now we're doing a lot, like I'm doing a lot more for concussion stuff, and it is new because it's just like, okay, well, what are some of the better ways to go about it? What are some of the symptoms? Like, again, we can know a little bit about it. We read up on it. We know some good things that work, but it's like, okay, well, when really should they be pushing it? When should they stop? How far should they go to? Like, all that kind of stuff. And it's a refresher. And so, like, there's definitely like, I'm not the strongest person, but can I get through a treatment plan with it? Yeah. Do I really try to talk with my PT beforehand? She's really, really good at like if she's going to be gone, and she looks at our patients coming in. If she sees someone that's a little off, we'll kind of go over it. If I'm seeing a patient and she's around, or in a meeting or something like that, we discuss about that patient beforehand. And again, I don't take it. I think the thing too is like, if you're not well versed in it, I don't take it personally that these patients like stick with her, or that she keeps the patients, or she doesn't feel like, I can hold up to, because she is stronger at that than me. Um, but I'm definitely trying to learn, and there's definitely like, as I learn, I'm getting to work with these patients more often too. So I'm trying to soak everything in at the same time, if that makes sense.
I think I think like it's just a big no in general. Just not like how do I want to put this? So I guess like I also came across this because the other PT was out again this week. So again, like I had to pick up that PT schedule, and it's like I try not to get discouraged or like you said, like take it personal that they want to work with that PT if they don't want to come in and stuff like that. Especially if
Hmm.
they've been working with that PT for so long. So we had one patient that's had the same PT for about 20 visits in a row and only comes in when that PT's there. And I think it was yesterday. The PT wasn't there, so I had to see this patient, and we try to give him as many heads up as we could, like, hey, the PT's not here today. Are you okay seeing so and so? And then they came in and they're like, hey, so just to make sure, like, this PT's not here, like, you're okay. And then, like, yeah, that's fine. Granted, I would say it probably wasn't my, just kind of like in hindsight thinking about it, probably wasn't like my best treatment. I tried to do what I could, but it's just so hard when
You're
like
trying to
they
live up to standards.
kind of like
Yeah.
they have a rhythm, they have like a groove of what they're working on, their pressure, their exercises, like all of this is dialed in with that PT. And stepping in, it's a lot harder than it seems. It can be
Hmm.
easy, like the patient can be super easygoing and not really have, don't really care that whoever they see. But sometimes it can be difficult seeing patients who are particular or just so used to their routine that when you come in, it's like, I know this isn't going to be the same, but let's try this today. And if it goes well, great. If it doesn't, then now you know. But
Yeah.
to your point, just try not to take things personal, especially if you're not really confident in certain skills. Like you said, practice, talk to the PT, set aside time to work on those skills, or maybe shadow in on those patients. Be like, hey, like I could have done that with my PT. when he was treating the Bell's palsy patient, like, hey, do you mind if I sit in just in case if I do have to see that patient, I know what you're doing, I know where they're at, and I can step in if need be.
Exactly. And I like kind of going just a little bit on like those patients who are kind of a little bit more one-on-one and do like to go on, because they're usually a little bit more complex patients that get kept with the PTs. Don't take it personally. In the long run, like at first I kind of felt like I was like, oh my gosh, am I bad? Am I not good enough to like treat if she's taking this away? But like I have a PT who's very involved with all of our patients, which I think is awesome. And sometimes I think where I used to work lacked that at times, because of just the amount of volume, it was impossible to do. And ultimately, you look at it, they're the ones signing off. They're the ones who putting their names really attached to it as their treatment plan, as their provider, their main care person. As much as like we are, they're the ones who sign off on everything. So I don't take it personally if they want to make sure that certain aspect gets done, or there's something that they really want to focus on. Like we have an ACL. Um, well, we have quite a few ACLs right now, but there's one day she's like, I'm going to keep her with me because I really want to focus on this. Like, and I want to see how she's doing. She goes, not that I don't think you could do it. She goes, but I really want to see how she responded after last treatment because we did a lot of jumping and she's having some stuff and she had pain. And I was like, okay, like she's really good at communicating with me also why she wants to keep a certain patient. Um, and I don't take offense to it, and I think that's sometimes it can be feel that way, but like really don't. Like luckily I've again a great PT who communicates that with me, but you never know, they're probably honestly just seeing them because there's something in their mind that they want to set to. And again, we're each individuals, and we tell our patients this all the time. You sometimes getting treated by multiple people is nice because you get different point of views. She might focus so much on like quad strengthening, and I might find focus more on balance, and which is good because those are definitely things that need to be worked on, and so you get a variety. But don't take offense if there's one day that they want to do it and work on it. um and the same thing with the new, like usually things that you don't see often, if we're not seeing them often, honestly a lot of our PTs aren't usually seeing them often, because that means something's not coming through your clinic enough to be often like to be
That's a
normally
good point.
seen. And so usually those PTs are honestly might be sometimes a little rusty on it too, because it's not something that they're constantly doing, just like we're not constantly doing certain injuries. And we're like, ooh, let me go back and refresh on that. So they sometimes like to keep that a little closer just because of the fact that they want to keep a closer eye on those injuries, because of the fact that they're a little, just like we are sometimes about our treatments, like a little unsure if it's working correctly. They can be the same way too. And so just remember that, like, that's sometimes why they hold it. It has nothing even sometimes to do with our skills or anything like that. It could be purely because of the fact that, they want to track it just because of the fact that they're unfamiliar with it too.
Yeah,
So,
and this happened a couple times. Not, I wouldn't say recently for me, anyways, but a while ago when I was like a technician, I would like there are certain diagnoses, like even the PTs were stumped. They're like,
mm-hmm.
I have never even heard of this. They would have to do their research before they go into the patient. They would see the patient, see how they present, and they'd go right back to research.
Yeah.
So they keep those patients with them, and it's like you said, it's mainly because they want to keep a closer eye on it. They want to monitor it. Day to day might be a little bit different, so they have to do reassessments every single time and see what they're up for. So those are other reasons maybe the PT might keep certain patients under them.
Yeah. It has nothing to do with you. And we all do that. We all hand people off. We all want to, like, there's times where I have a couple shoulder patients that I've worked very closely. It just kind of worked out that I was kind of consistently seeing them. And so I do, like, when they're not on my schedule, I'm like, oh, wait, or like they get evaled. I'm like, okay, how are we doing? Because I'm so good. Like I'm, re-evaled. I'm like, okay, I really worked closely with that patient. Like I want to make sure I'm doing everything, the best for the patient and everything's working out. And so I think we try to keep that in mind with going back to just new diagnoses. Like we try to do our best, keep it in mind. When in doubt, like the thing too is don't be afraid to be like, hey, I haven't treated this a lot, or I haven't treated this at all. What do you recommend? What are some areas to focus on? Any major things? Again, this is if the PT's around. These are easy questions. Any major things I should look out for? If not, thoroughly read the eval. And if you still have questions and the PT's not on site, you're supposed to be able to get in contact with them. When in doubt, if you have any questions, ask them. Because it's better that you be safe than sorry with anything that you're unsure of. So that's my
Yeah,
big
I
take from that.
agree. And I feel like that's kind of all we have for
I was about to say,
this.
do you have any like diagnosis that you haven't come across but you'd like to work with?
Hmm.
Or you had that and then you're like, you did it the first time and you're like, oh my gosh, that was the scariest thing almost. Because like, for example, for me, the scariest thing was during my clinical rotation was actually working with amputee for the first time. Because there's just so much going on in a way. And so, like, it was definitely super nerve wracking. I think that's the most nerve wracking with a diagnosis I've kind of ever gotten. Just because they don't really present as consistently as some other diagnoses. But
I can't think of like a certain diagnosis I was like really trying to work with. Um, I'll say maybe like the craziest thing to me was probably still going to be like anything wound care related that I've done.
mm-hmm.
Like I said, you've done amputees. Like I've done big toe amputations. I've done 8 above the knee, below the knee amputations as well. But wound care, it's like one of those things that you can learn it in school. You have like those dummies that you can practice on. I'm not sure if
I don't
every
even
single.
have
I was about to say I don't know
dummies.
if every school has the little practice like stage of ulcer, like all the pressure ulcers and all that. But doing it in person is so like so much different, like so much not even close to just like those practice ones that we did.
So that was your first one. That was your kind of when you came across it for the first time. That's what like threw you for a loop.
Yeah, like one like that. I mean, people can look up pictures at their own discretion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but necrotizing fasciitis, that was brutal. It was in
Yeah,
someone's pelvic region, and it definitely stuck with me for quite some time after that.
I find it still
Um,
sticking with them.
there's a couple like just necrotic tissue that I've seen, stage 4 pressure ulcers. There's been oh, what's it called? I'm forgetting it. But like their toes were like mummified. There's
Mm-hmm.
just like no more circulation going there, and it was just completely black. Like you can touch it, and it's probably about to fall off.
I have a patient like that right now. They're doing an MRI. Side note, but they're doing an MRI on his big toe to see if there is enough actual tissue underneath because they keep debris and it's just not getting any better. So they're looking to see if there's enough healthy tissue to go in and surgically debris or if they need to surgically remove the big toe at this point.
Yeah, I would just say wound care is definitely a specialty that if you're curious, definitely go shadow it if you can in a hospital. But I would say those are any of those diagnoses would be the ones that threw me for a loop.
You want to know one of the things that I thought would throw me for a loop, but not actually didn't the first time I did it? I thought I was going to be like super nervous when I got told to do it, but then like honestly, when it came down to it, it was totally easy. Was the first time I was actually told to remove staples. So
Oh, with a staple remover.
yeah, with the staple remover, like just in general, because we had a doctor who never removed his staples. He would have it done at PT unless there were some complications involved. Um, we had a patient coming in. Her staples needed to be removed that day. PT was not going to be there. Or I forget where he was. He was somewhere. I forget exactly. But PT just was not able to do it. I think he was there, but he was in a massive meeting. And so he was like, all right, this is what you're going to do. And like, I went in with him. I think we had one prior to that, or I don't know if we just covered it, but I thought for sure, like, I was like, okay, I was going to be super like nervous. And honestly, I went in and I was like, doot, 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 doot. And I was like, that was fun.
Like anybody, you're like holding the staple remover. Anybody
Yeah,
else?
I'm like,
Anybody
anybody else?
else? You go
Anybody
grab
got it?
the like a stapler. Like, do you want me to staple you and then I'll remove it myself? I got you.
Yeah, and that's the thing sometimes, like, your first times for certain things might not even be disease. It might literally be removing staples for the first time or, changing a bandage for the first time. Those things can get a little nerve-wracking when you're not used to it.
I would also say
So,
braces too.
oh my
Like knee
gosh.
immobilizers. They have like all the different kind of braces they have, just because they're so different.
They're so
So you're like
different.
looking at it and you're like, does this go this way, this way? Okay, okay,
Half
this
the
strap, this. Okay, wait, what? Like you got this,
Half the
right?
time the
Okay, here you
patients
go.
know. Yeah, exactly. I'm like, I just let the patients because they know their brace is better. But literally half of sometimes the ACL braces, I can't even figure out how to unlock them because they're all like slightly different. I'm pressing this one and this one, or
Yeah,
you need a key
they're
here. And I'm
coming out
like,
with
oh my
new ones as
gosh.
well. I remember like in school, I think we had like 20 different orthotics there, braces, AFOs, leaf, spring, like all of it. And it's just like I don't know when these were made, but when you go out to the field, like they look nothing like that because
Right?
they're
They're
advancing, or
so
if you need a
different.
specific kind of custom made one, then all of a sudden it's
And
different than
each
the others.
doctor's different on which ones they like. Yeah, it's different. You want a funny story about braces though?
Are we talking about like teeth braces or?
No, no.
When it's a
Like
funny story,
so
it could really go anyway.
So I was at last week. Yeah, last week. I went and saw my doc for a follow up, and pretty much it comes down to I still need to wear a boot, especially for work because my pain gets too high, and I swell too much still. Um, so I'm still using a boot for work. Well, I'm going to put my boot back on, and mind you, this is my third cam boot at this point, and it was older from my second surgery. It was from after my second surgery, but I've always kept it. And then um when I had this one, he was like, "Oh, you're going to only be in a boot for like about 2 to 3 weeks." And I was like, "Okay." He goes, "Do you need a new one?" I was like, "Nah, this one should last like 2 to 3 weeks. That'll be fine." And so he's like, "Okay, just bring it in so I can make sure like it's good. And if so, then we won't worry about getting a new one." So everything was fine. We used it, but because it was already older and it was kind of already worn down, wearing it for longer than that time frame, it really is worn down. Like it will not stick anymore. Like the padding does not really stick. I lost like the middle padding. And so I was putting on my boot, back on my boot in the doctor's office. And I started putting it on, I put my padding on, and then I go to do just the strap over my toes. And he goes, "That's not the way you do the boot." And I was like, "Hold on." And by the way, my husband starts to die laughing in the background that I'm getting corrected. And I was like, wait, 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 wait. Before you come at me about strapping in this boot, I was like, I have to do it this way. And he goes, "You know to put the strap right
Yeah,
below the
do the
joint first
distal
and
one.
then the
Yeah,
above. Yeah. And then you go back to and I was like, I know. I go, but my boot won't stick it. In order for it to get it to stay down, I got to do the toe one first, then restrap this one, and then I have to go back in and retie, like do them." And he goes, "Do you want a new boot?" And I was like, "Well, if you're telling me I got a couple more weeks, yeah, just give me a new boot."
like fine, I'll cave. Get me a new boot.
Yeah. Oh man, and I'll tell you, being in a new boot sucks because I can definitely tell how unrestricted mine was, breaking down wise, because this new one is like definitely doing its job. But it was pretty funny that the doctor yelled at me for not strapping him in correctly. But it was all because of the fact that I had
He
to strap it
expected
in
better.
a different way. Well, he just chuckled when he actually saw it. Because, like, literally you go to put the padding together, like the little pad wrap around. And that little pad won't Velcro onto itself anymore because it's so ripped up and torn up.
Yeah, you need a new boot.
I did get a new boot.
Even just for,
I
like,
have a new boot.
that's what I'm saying. Just even for safety reasons, you need a new boot.
Yeah,
It's a good thing you got a new boot.
Yeah, but it was pretty funny. It was a good laugh, but yeah. Y'all, I got yelled at for putting a boot on.
Alright, well, with that, we'll wrap up this episode.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for listening. Hope everyone had a good holiday.
Yes,
we are
belated 4th.
looking into over 100-degree weather here in Vegas in the coming weeks. So, yeah, we're going to stay inside.
As my nephew has been telling me all week, it's hot outside.
Yeah, it's getting brutal. But that was a completely side note. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram. Join the Discord. Look at the YouTube. We'll leave links down below. And until then, we'll see you guys next time.
All right, bye guys.
The information in this video or podcast is not intended nor implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. All content, including text, graphics, images, and information contained in this video or podcast is for general information purposes only and does not replace your professors or a consultation from your own doctor or healthcare professional.